Hi, Dawn and Ben here with Bit by Bit Bodyworks. What we've got for today is a little bit about the hamstrings. I am a self-recovering identifier as having tight hamstrings, and I came into a lot of this information kind of just by chance and on my own and through my own curiosity and learning, and I feel like it might be helpful for some of you. So if you identify as having tight hamstrings or perceiving that you have tight hamstrings, you'll want to listen. To start, I think it's useful to kind of know, like, where are the hamstrings? What are they? What do they do? So that's where Ben's going to help us out. So our hamstrings are 3 different muscles, and they originate on our sit bone. So if you've ever sat at a sporting event on a hard bench or bleacher, those bony bits on your butt, those are your sit bones or your ischial tuberosities. So we've got 3 hamstring muscles that originate there, run the length of the back of our thigh, and attach 2 of them to the tibia and 1 of them to the fibula. So if you can envision this tissue that come down to here, and if it shortened, how that would create knee flexion. Or if the knee stayed there and it shortened, how it would create hip extension. Okay? So that's what the hamstrings are, where they are, what they do. Now, hamstrings, to do this knee flexion and to do this hip extension, they do what's referred to as a concentric contraction. And actually, concentrically contracting is the only thing our nervous system signals our skeletal muscles to do. And what that is where the muscle fibrils, the actin and myosin, are signaled to slide together, and that shortens that muscle, skeletal muscle tissue. Now, if the force of that contraction is greater than the external force, you're going to have a concentric contraction. But if I were to reach my hand back and resist that concentric contraction and no movement happens, that's an isometric contraction. What that might look or feel like is if you push your 2 palms together, those are isometric contractions at the muscles of your biceps that you might be feeling, or into your chest and even your abdomen a little bit potentially. Okay. Now, if the external force of me pushing on the heel is greater than the tension created in that muscle with that concentric contraction, what happens is I move into an eccentric contraction, which has the actin and myosin muscle proteins sliding away from one another, and then the muscle protein tighten kind of takes over. So actin and myosin won't be near one another at this point, and tighten is what is involved. So those are the 3 different types of contractions. Now, as I said earlier, the nervous system only signals our skeletal muscles to concentrically contract. External force and the external environment that those contractions come in contact with then determine whether it's going to stay concentric, become isometric, or eccentric. In the case of hamstrings, for me, I think what was happening was I was doing a lot of yoga. I was very busy, go, 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 young family. I think, just in general, not very grounded. And then layering on this not being very much in my feet and my legs and grounded, and doing a lot of this forward fold stuff where I'm sending my head and the weight of my torso forward of my toes, that it had the tissue of my hamstrings do that concentric contraction, but I couldn't, it didn't even know how to go to an eccentric. I think it started to trigger like a stretch response, and I was reflexively guarding in those tissues because it just felt like an emergency brake in your car, that kind of sense. And the interesting thing is that, the sensory information that comes in from our muscles informs our nervous system. And the meaning our nervous system makes of that information then informs future movement and future choices. And so the body and the brain really are communicating to one another, and to a large extent can impact our motor outputs. So I, like most people, spent a long time like just thinking, oh, just strengthen this and stretch that. And I tried rolling and I wasn't really getting anywhere. By that point, I had SI pain on top of it. And I wish I had known what I know now, but I know it now. And so that's great. And now you're going to know it now too. So to recap, hamstrings, 3 muscles, ischial tuberosities to below the knee. They create knee flexion and hip extension when we're concentrically contracting. Okay, so they cross the hip joint and the knee joint. Now, what I think was happening for me, as I said, is I wasn't very grounded. And so then I'm going to yoga class and I'm trying to create this aesthetic of what a forward fold looks like, which was, open your heart, swan dive forward kind of thing, which I think my brain started to perceive as like, we have to put the brakes on the hamstrings or you're going to fall on your face. So I'm going to show you a few ways that I started to play with that, because those aren't bad cues. It's not that those cues created this, what was happening in my body. It was really the perfect storm of what was happening in my body. The cues were perpetuating what already wasn't working in my body at the time. And I didn't know enough. So the first thing is to just simply play with how grounded you feel. And a way that you can notice that is how much ability to sense with the soles of your feet and feel as much contact with the soles of your feet on the floor do you have? And now, can you shift your weight forward and back, maintaining that sensing quality through the skin of your feet? Almost imagining if you're on a warm tile floor, you know how it kind of feels like the skin just kind of goes like butter, okay? The other thing you can play with is noticing your breath. So just notice how far down, all air out, does the sense of your exhale go? Does it come to the breastbone, to the belly, to the pelvis, to your knees, to your feet? How far down do you sense the completion of all air out of that exhale? And can you stay in that place of your body as you inhale? Or do you lift up and out? Okay, so it might be that you just play with those two practices for a little bit. A place where I got to kind of playing with was once I was feeling grounded into my feet, I used a chair. And this is just a standard chair. And what I did with the chair was I brought it to my pubic bone in the front of my hip crease. I stood with my feet far enough from the wall that it didn't feel like I was being pitched forward. Okay. And I liked having my arms in front of me and on the chair because it allowed me to kind of soften through my chest and my breastbone. Because the other habit I noticed that I had was to initiate that forward fold, I would kind of extend through the rib cage, and that would have me even further lose connection with the feet. So it's not that extending through the rib cage is bad either. It's that, can I do that while still being grounded? And to start, I couldn't. So I needed to kind of soften through that. The key was that I stayed connected through my legs and my feet. And then I started to play with folding over that chair. And as I played with this, my hamstrings started to respond differently. They started to become more responsive rather than reflexive. I started to play with, can I maintain tension through my abdominals while extending through the thoracic spine and the cervical spine? You know, and if I couldn't, I needed to back off. Another way that I played with this was using bands. And one way was I just looped it through. You could have someone hold this behind you. I like having it anchored to something. Just helps my brain kind of settle down. And again, to start, I just really kind of felt into how grounded I felt. And I needed a mirror because I didn't have much sense. Like as soon as my shoulders came forward, my hips would go back, which had my knees flex, which then didn't have my hamstrings have to eccentrically load. It allowed them to stay concentric while kind of creating this optical illusion. So I also used a ski pole or dowel to start kind of behind me so I could feel where my pelvis and my head were. And again, for me, it was to help create this connection between the pelvis and the rib cage. So you could use a stick, especially if you have trouble moving at the hip joint. You could also just use your hands. And then what I played with here was leaning into the bands a bit. But because I had the bands, I had something that I had to actively engage against, which again created a different response in my nervous system of those hamstrings. And then I had to decelerate it as I came back up. Okay? And it's all about creating this, new kind of communication between the nervous system and between our skeletal muscles. And so one other way that I played with the band was in that forward fold on the wall again. And I would put the band underneath the ball of my foot and bring it up over my shoulders and then hold it with my hands. And again, this helped me ground because it literally pulled me down towards the ground. And then I had to work against being pulled down. And I had to keep reaching down while I worked to come back up. So it helped me feel the distinction between grounding while also lengthening. Which helped my hamstrings figure out some different ways to navigate the load that it encountered. So I hope that some of that was helpful. I hope that it saves you some time. And please know, if you want help, if you want an extra set of eyes to look at how you're moving, where you're initiating from, and someone to collaborate with, to troubleshoot, and really get you the gains that you're looking for, I would love to work together. We can work live together in Calgary or virtually through Zoom. But please, please, please know that change is always possible and life-changing. Thanks for joining me. Namaste.